We found a photo that was never taken, a family story of loss and healing. Reddit stories. It's strange how a single moment can splinter a lifetime, and how that fracture grows silently like a crack beneath the surface of a frozen lake. Before everything, before the whispers, the silence, the vanished birthday calls, my family looked like any other. At least, that's what people saw from the outside. We had the smiling holiday cards, the crowded Thanksgiving tables, the overlapping voices during game nights. But underneath it all was a current, quiet but strong, pulling us in different directions long before any of us realized we were drifting. My mother always kept a shelf of photo albums in the hallway, dating back to when she and my father were teenagers. Her handwriting marked each one. Summer at the lake, a Jeremy's graduation, Christmas 2005. And I used to believe those albums were the proof we needed, the irrefutable evidence of a perfect family. I'd flip through the pages slowly, pausing at each image like I could capture more than just the moment. Maybe the feeling, maybe the certainty that everything had once been whole. But no album was ever labeled the year we stopped talking, or the last time we were all in one room. That's the thing about families. They break without making a sound loud enough to notice, until the silence becomes the only thing left. It didn't start with a fight, though that's what people always assume. There was no betrayal, no slammed door, no climactic explosion. It began with something quieter, an unanswered message, a missed dinner, a shift in tone during a phone call. My brother and I used to talk daily, even into our late 20s. We were close, not just in age, but in understanding. We had grown up watching our parents argue behind closed doors and cover it all up with forced smiles. We shared a kind of unspoken loyalty, like soldiers from the same forgotten war. But somewhere between his wedding and my second failed relationship, the calls got shorter. Then they stopped. And when our mother got sick, and I flew home after years away, I realized I didn't know what kind of man he had become, nor did he know me. We sat at her kitchen table, the one stained with a decade of coffee and quiet tension, and spoke like polite strangers. He told me about his job, his kids, his mortgage. I told him about my freelance work, the cities I'd lived in, the things I'd built and lost. We didn't mention the gaps. My father had always been the calm one, the fixer. When we were little, he had a way of entering a room and restoring order, even when our mother's moods shifted like the tides. He was the kind of man who could say 10,000 words with a raised eyebrow. But over time, even he grew tired of holding everything together. I noticed it in the way he stopped correcting us when we bickered, in the way he stared at the television a little too long. There was one night just before I left for college that I remember vividly. I came downstairs for water and found him standing by the front door, fully dressed, car keys in hand. I thought he was leaving. I asked him where he was going, and he just said, "Nowhere. Just needed air." But I think that was the first time he wanted to disappear. Not forever. Just long enough to forget the weight of being the glue. The thing about glue, though, is it doesn't hold forever. It dries. It cracks. And when it does, everything falls where it wants. My mother's illness brought a strange sort of clarity. Not about love or forgiveness, but about distance. How it grows, how it calcifies. I stayed for 3 weeks, watching her get weaker in the very bed she once folded laundry on while humming to Fleetwood Mac. She never asked for much. Never did. But on the second week, she asked me to find a photograph. "The one from the beach house," she said. "The last summer we were happy." I knew exactly the one she meant. I looked for hours. I checked every album, every drawer, even the dusty boxes in the garage. It wasn't there. I asked my brother if he remembered it. Mom in the straw hat, Dad grilling something, the sun catching our hair just right. He didn't remember, or he pretended not to. I think forgetting is a survival mechanism for some people. In the end, I realized that photograph never existed. Maybe we never took it. Maybe she imagined it into being, the way we all imagine golden years that weren't as golden as we want to believe. Or maybe, deep down, We all knew not to capture what was already slipping away. People think families collapse under storms, but really they dissolve under routine, under the slow erosion of neglect. A missed birthday call, a secret held too long, a truth left unsaid because it's easier to smile and pass the potatoes. I left my parents' house the way I had years before, quietly, early morning, before anyone was awake. I didn't cry, though I thought I would. Instead, I drove to the old beach house, or at least what was left of it. The place had been sold years ago, replaced by condos and neon signs. I parked anyway. Sat in the car for a long time, staring at the horizon. I kept imagining us there, laughing. My brother throwing sand at me. My mother's voice calling us to eat. My father's arm around her shoulders. A scene stitched from memory and hope, real and unreal. There's a box I keep in my apartment, hidden at the back of a closet. Inside are the few photographs I did take. Candid, blurry shots, moments that didn't make the albums. One day I found one of my brother and me, maybe 6 or 7 years old, sitting on the roof of our playhouse. We were holding popsicles. He had chocolate on his shirt, and I had one sock missing. We were laughing about something. I don't remember what. I keep that photo out sometimes, not for nostalgia, but to remind myself that once we were something. Maybe we still are, buried under layers of time and misunderstanding. Maybe we all are. Families are strange that way. They bend, twist, splinter, but they never quite vanish. Not completely. I often wonder what would happen if we staged a reunion, just the 4 of us. If we sat down and aired every resentment, every silence. Would it heal or destroy? Would it matter? Or would we all pretend, like we used to, and take another smiling picture for the album? A lie wrapped in good lighting. That's the trouble with families. They teach you to hide things in plain sight. My mother passed 2 months after I returned to the city. My father called, voice like sandpaper. He didn't ask me to come back, just told me where the service would be. I went. Of course I did. My brother gave a eulogy. It was beautiful. Honest, even. Afterward, we stood outside the church in the cold spring wind. Unsure of how to speak, he said, "She would have liked today." I nodded. That was all. We didn't take a photo. Not that day. Maybe that was the only truth we allowed ourselves. It's been a year since the funeral, though it doesn't feel like time passed at all. Or maybe it passed in strange, fragmented ways, like watching an old home movie with missing reels. I go about my life, emails, meetings, errands, but the silence between us has stretched so far that it now feels like a second skin. My brother and I haven't spoken since that day outside the church. No texts. No calls. Not even a forwarded meme or a tagged memory on social media. It's not an argument that keeps us apart. It's the inertia, the accumulated weight of not reaching out until it feels too awkward to try. Grief has a way of becoming a third party in every relationship. Sometimes it binds. Sometimes it severs. In our case, it did both, and then just left us suspended in that fracture. I think about my father more often now, alone in that house. His silence was once a sign of peace, a balm against the chaos of my mother's intensity. But now I wonder if it's become his prison. We were never the kind of family that said, "I love you," out loud. Not because we didn't feel it, but because we believed actions spoke louder. Except, over time, we forgot to act. I call him once a week, usually on Sundays. The conversations are always the same. Whether groceries, whether he's fixed the leaky faucet. I don't ask him how he feels. He doesn't tell me. There's a gravity in his voice now, like every word costs him more than it used to. And I get it. I'm not the same either. Something inside me calcified that day I left the church without turning back. I try to remember what made us drift. Was it when he chose to stay home during my move to college? When he missed my first art exhibit because he had scheduling conflict? Or was it smaller things? Habitual, unnoticed. The way he'd always praised my brother more for his stable choices. Or how he stopped hugging me after I turned 12. It's easy to build a story from shadows. Harder to tear it down with truth. I told myself for years that I didn't need his validation, that I'd made peace with our quiet distance. But lately, when I lie awake in the light of early morning, I realize I still want to ask him why. Not in anger, just in need. My apartment is a quiet place filled with echoes of what I've kept. Books from my childhood, photographs from trips I took alone, art supplies I no longer use but can't bear to throw away. One shelf holds a stack of unopened letters, birthday cards from old friends, invitations I never responded to. Sometimes I wonder if I'm preserving memories or avoiding them. I still haven't deleted my mother's number from my phone. Every so often, I'll scroll to it, stare at it, half expecting it to ring. My therapist says that's normal, part of the grieving process. But what she doesn't understand is that I don't just miss her. I miss the idea of us. The four of us in some alternate universe, where we learned how to talk before we learned how to hide. One night I dream about that beach house again. In the dream, we're all there, young, whole. My father is lighting a grill. My mother is reading on the porch. My brother is throwing a frisbee toward me, and I catch it every time. It feels warm, real, until I wake up and realize I've been clutching a pillow like a life raft. I don't tell anyone about these dreams. They're the only place I feel connected anymore. The strange thing is, after she died, people started reaching out. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunts with brittle voices and loaded questions. They'd say things like, "Your mother was proud of you," or "She always talked about how close you and your brother were." I wanted to ask them if they'd mistaken us for another family. Proud? Close? Maybe in her mind we were, in the version of us she held on to like that non-existent photograph. Or maybe she remembered things differently because memory does that. It edits, embellishes. We all curate our pain into palatable stories eventually. I began sorting through her things the following winter. My father finally asked, almost hesitantly, if I could come help. He said he didn't know what to keep, what to donate. So I flew home. The house smelled like her still. Lavender, old books, and the faintest trace of citrus hand lotion. We started in the attic. It was like peeling back layers of our lives. School projects with glitter still clinging to the corners. Tattered board games with missing pieces. Love letters between my parents, some tender, some passive-aggressive. I found a box marked with my name. Inside were drawings I'd made, newspaper clippings of exhibits I'd been featured in, and a sealed envelope. It had my name on it in her looping script. I didn't open it immediately. I waited until I was back in my childhood room, sitting on the edge of the bed, moonlight pooling on the floor like spilled milk. The letter wasn't long. She wrote about the things she couldn't say while alive. How she regretted letting the silence grow. How she wished she had done more to hold us together. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She only said, "I hope one day you can see us as we were, not as we failed to be." I cried, not because of what she said, but because it made me realize how lonely she must have been. Holding it all in. Pretending. Waiting for us to become the version she had in her mind. The next day, I asked my father if he remembered the photo. The one she kept mentioning. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "We never took it." Then, quietly, "But I think she needed it to exist." That night, after he went to bed, I went into the garage and dug through the last remaining boxes. One of them was full of undeveloped film canisters, dozens of them labeled only by dates. I took them back with me to the city. It took weeks to get them developed. Some came out blank, overexposed. Others were fragmented. Half of someone's face, the edge of a sunset, feet in the sand. But in one, there we were. Not the posed photo she imagined, but a moment caught without planning. My mother mid-laugh, my father reaching out to brush something from her cheek, my brother with a shell in his hand, and me squinting into the sun. It was blurry, imperfect, beautiful. I stared at it for hours, memorizing every pixel. I made 4 copies. I mailed one to my father, one to my brother. I kept one. The 4th I left at her grave, tucked in the edge of a flower pot she'd once painted with sunflowers. I didn't include a note. She didn't need one. Then, one day, months later, my phone buzzed. A message from my brother. 3 words, I got it. That was all. But it was something. The first brick back in place. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure how to respond. I typed and deleted half a dozen replies. Finally, I settled on, so did I. There's no dramatic reunion after that. No weepy confession or sudden family dinner. Just slow steps. A shared article. A birthday call. A photo sent with no caption. And through it all, I've come to realize something profound. Families are not defined by the moments we frame, but by the spaces in between, the echoes we carry, the attempts we make, the forgiveness we offer even when it feels like surrender. I've since started painting again. Nothing serious, just abstract scenes, memories rendered in colors and shapes. One canvas hangs above my desk. It's blue and gold and fragmented like stained glass. I call it the photograph we never took. But when I look at it, I don't see what's missing anymore. I see what we tried to become. And maybe, in the end, that's the only truth that matters. The message from my brother, just 3 words, became an echo I couldn't stop hearing. I got it. Simple, stripped of emotion. But it cracked something open, not just between us, but within me. That photograph, the one I thought never existed, had traveled farther than a picture should be able to. It became a kind of bridge. Crooked, weathered, fragile, but there. And bridges, even the ones barely holding together, are better than chasms. In the days that followed, I noticed a shift. He started sending short texts. Nothing grand, just threads of his life that I'd been missing for years. A photo of his youngest daughter covered in paint. A video of his dog chasing its tail. A meme about siblings that made me laugh more than I expected to. It felt unnatural at first, like trying to remember how to use muscles you haven't moved in years. But slowly, clumsily, we began learning to speak again. It wasn't just with him. My father, too, seemed to change. Though not in obvious ways, he still sounded gruff on the phone, still spoke in weather reports and appliance updates. But once, completely out of character, he asked me what I was painting. I hesitated, then told him about the canvas above my desk. He didn't say much, only that my mother would have liked that. And somehow, that landed heavier than any elaborate compliment. These small exchanges began accumulating like snowflakes. Silent, barely noticed, but slowly changing the shape of everything underneath. But with every step forward, the past tugged at me. Not with guilt, with questions. I couldn't stop thinking about the moment it all truly began to unravel. Not the obvious ones, not the milestones, but the subtler breaking points. One in particular returned often, like a skipped record. My mother's 50th birthday. It had been a quiet celebration. Just the 4 of us, a dinner at her favorite Italian place. We all smiled for the photo the waiter took. But I remember the car ride home. How my father drove in silence, how my mother stared out the window, how my brother scrolled on his phone, and how I, sitting behind my mother, watched her reflection in the glass. Her smile had vanished, like it had only ever been a mask. That was the night I realized something. Families don't collapse in fire. They dissolve in indifference. We were all together, and yet we weren't really there. We were orbiting our own worlds, tethered only by obligation. Years later, it was hard to reconcile that memory with the new reality forming around me. My brother and I kept talking. He invited me to his daughter's school play, and I actually went. I sat in the second row, watched her fumble through a few lines, and felt something unexpected swell in my chest. Pride, joy, regret. Maybe all 3. Afterward, he introduced me to his wife again, though we'd met before. This time, she hugged me tightly, like I was being welcomed back from some long, hard war no one had spoken of. In the car afterward, my brother and I sat for a while before starting the engine. He told me he'd seen the photo and cried, said he didn't even know why. Maybe because it reminded him of who we used to be. I told him I'd cried too. And then, in one of those rare moments of clarity, he asked, "Do you think Mom knew she was the only thing holding us together?" I didn't answer right away. But I thought about it long after he dropped me off. The truth is, she probably did. She was always the center, loud, opinionated, sometimes impossible, but always pulling us in like gravity. And when she died, the orbit broke. We scattered. And maybe we needed to. Maybe families need to fall apart before they understand what they're built on. Back in the city, I started visiting places I hadn't been in years. The park where I used to take my sketchbook. The cafe where I'd listen to my mother's voicemails. The gallery where my first show had opened. I was reclaiming parts of myself I'd put in storage, like old photographs waiting to be rediscovered. At the same time, I started writing. Not novels, not stories, just letters. Letters to her. I kept them in a notebook, each one dated, each one an attempt to bridge the impossible. Dear Mom, I wrote, today I saw a woman who looked just like you. She was buying lemons. I almost said your name. Dear Mom, I'm going to dinner with Dad next week. Just the two of us. I don't know if we'll talk, but I'm going. Dear Mom, I painted something new. It's called What We Left Unsaid. You'd hate the name, but I think you'd understand it. But they weren't meant for anyone else. Just me, just her. And in writing them, I found a new truth that healing isn't a return. It's a becoming. Becoming someone who can carry the past without being crushed by it. Who can hold contradictions, love and loss, anger and tenderness, and not need to resolve them. My father and I did go to dinner. A small diner near his house. He wore the same coat he'd worn to her funeral. Still hadn't replaced the missing button. We didn't talk about her at first. We talked about traffic, about the construction on Main Street. Then over pie, he said. She kept us busy. Always had something going on. I nodded. She was the heartbeat. I replied. He nodded back. And that was it. No tears. No epiphany. Just Tupel sitting with a shared ghost between them, not trying to banish it, just learning to live with its presence. After that dinner, he started calling me instead of the other way around. Always early in the morning. He never said why. He just started. And I answered. Always. Because sometimes love isn't loud or poetic. Sometimes it's showing up, picking up, sitting down across from someone who hurt you and choosing not to run. My brother and I went on a short trip not long after. Just a weekend. We didn't call it a reunion or anything meaningful. We just said, let's go somewhere. We chose the coast, not the old beach house. That place was gone, but the sea was still there, unchanged, uncaring, endless. We walked the shore in silence for a long time, like we were listening for something in the waves. Finally, he said, I wish we'd noticed sooner how far we drifted. I told him we were noticing now. Maybe that was enough. I brought my camera on that trip. Real film, not digital. I took photos of the water, of seagulls, of us. None were perfect. Most were underexposed, but they were real. After we got back, I developed them in my apartment, and one stood out. My brother, standing at the edge of the surf, back turned, hands in pockets. It reminded me of a photo from our childhood. Him in the same pose, watching the tide. I placed the two side by side. Time separated them, but the shape was the same. The boy and the man. The past and the now. That's when it hit me. We hadn't lost our family. We'd just buried it beneath the years. And now, slowly, we were digging it out again, piece by fragile piece. The holidays were different that year. Not like the ones from childhood. Not loud or crowded. Just us. My father, my brother, his wife and kids, and me. We cooked together. Ate too much, took a group photo. No one posed, it just happened. A candid moment, someone mid-laugh, someone reaching for more potatoes. I didn't even look at the image until days later, but when I did, I saw it. What my mother had longed for. Not perfection, not forced smiles, just connection. Messy, evolving, real. And that's where we were now, in the middle of the story, not at the end. Not healed, but healing, still broken in places, but aware of the cracks. Choosing to stay, even when it's easier to go. Choosing to call, to answer, to remember. I think that's the truest form of family. Not the name, not the blood, but the decision to hold on. Again, and again, and again. It was spring again when I finally visited the attic of our family home alone. This time not to help my father sort things or unearth fragments of the past, but to confront the boxes I had deliberately avoided before. The ones without labels, the ones stacked in the back like forgotten chapters. My father had gone out for groceries, a new ritual of his since Mom passed. He always came back with too much bread and never enough fruit, but I think he liked the quiet space shopping gave him. The attic smelled like dust and wood rot, the scent of history settling into its final shape. The light came in thin blades through the slats, slicing across tarps, cracked suitcases, and sagging cardboard. I pulled the first unlabeled box toward me with a strange mix of dread and curiosity. Inside, I found scraps. Not junk. Scraps. Of projects unfinished, dreams deferred, letters half-written. My mother's cursive appeared again and again in margin notes, old journals, to-do lists. Always in the margins, always as if life itself were something she was annotating but never starring in. One small journal, leather-bound and soft with age, caught my eye. The first page began with, "What I want them to know." My hands went cold. I sat cross-legged on the wooden floor and began to read. It wasn't a diary, not exactly. More like a manual of heartbreak and hope. She wrote about me and my brother, about my father. About the choices she made, the silences she regretted, the truths she was too afraid to speak aloud. There were entire pages dedicated to memories that I thought no one but I had remembered. The time I stayed up all night with the flu and she slept on the floor beside me. The drawing I made at age 10 of our family, where I'd left her out because she'd yelled at me that morning. She'd kept that drawing, she said. Said it reminded her how even small moments could wound. But also how forgiveness wasn't an event. It was a rhythm. I read for hours, the sunlight shifting across the floorboards until the attic was wrapped in dusk. One sentence kept repeating in my head long after I closed the journal. I hope they realize one day that the things I left unsaid were never meant to be wounds. They were just the only way I knew how to protect what we had. It wasn't an apology, not quite. But it was something more honest. And maybe that's what we'd all been craving all along. Not absolution, just truth. After that visit, I began painting differently. My canvases grew larger, messier, more vibrant. I stopped trying to create order and instead began honoring the chaos. One of my new pieces, a chaotic swirl of crimson and silver and storm blue, I titled Margins. It was raw, emotional, and when I posted it online, it caught more attention than anything else I'd done. People said they felt something in it, something familiar and unspoken. One message stood out. A stranger had written, "This looks like how grief feels when you finally stop denying it." I read that line over and over. They were right. Meanwhile, my brother and I began speaking regularly, but something had shifted further, beyond casual reconnection. One evening he called and said, "Do you ever wonder who we are without her?" The question startled me. It had sat quietly in the back of my mind for months, unspoken but omnipresent. "All the time," I answered. And then, because the moment demanded it, I added, "I think we're still trying to figure that out." There was a long pause on his end before he said, "I want to take the kids to the beach. Not the old one, just somewhere with water. You should come." We went, a different shore but still the same sea. The kids built lopsided castles. His wife took photos. He and I walked down the edge of the surf, just like before, but this time we didn't fill the silence with noise. We let it sit there. It wasn't heavy anymore, just honest. He told me he'd found some of Mom's notes too, tucked in his childhood books in the sleeves of old VHS tapes. One had been addressed to him. She wrote about how she admired his steadiness, his loyalty, how he was the root that kept us from blowing away. I could hear the emotion behind his words, even if he never let it crack the surface. When we returned to our rented cottage that evening, we found the kids asleep on the couch, tangled in blankets. He looked at me and said, "She used to say we'd understand someday. I thought she meant about parenting. But I think she meant everything." I nodded. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. A few weeks later, my father surprised me. He asked if I would help him organize a memorial exhibit for my mother at the local library. Not a somber affair. He wanted it to feel like her. Alive, complex, beautiful and flawed. We pulled her things from storage. Her old poetry, photos, that blue dress she wore on their first anniversary. I contributed some of my paintings too, ones I'd made since her passing. On the day of the exhibit opening, I walked in early and found him standing before one of my pieces. Margins. He didn't say anything, but his eyes were red. When he turned to me, he just nodded once. A small gesture, but it held the weight of an entire shared history. In that moment, I realized that grief had cracked him open too. He was just slower to bleed. The exhibit was modest but deeply personal. People came. Neighbors, old friends, people I hadn't seen since high school. They wandered through the space quietly, reading her words, standing before her photographs, watching the videos we digitized of old home movies. One woman approached me near the guest book and said, "Your mother helped me once. She never told anyone. Paid my rent when I was behind." She just said, "Families don't end at blood." I didn't know what to say. But the tears came anyway. Not sad tears. The kind that feel like release. That night, as we packed up, my father said something I never expected. "I wasn't always fair to you," he said. "I expected you to be strong in the wrong ways." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized how tired he was, how human. "It's okay," I said. I didn't always try in the right ways either. There was no hug, no crescendo, just understanding, and that was enough. After the exhibit, something subtle but lasting began to change in all of us. The calls became more frequent. We sent each other old photos we'd found, shared recipes, even argued over things that didn't matter. Because now we could. The fractures hadn't disappeared, but they were no longer fault lines. Just the geography of who we were. And I began to see that the story wasn't one of loss after all. It was one of evolution. One morning, I opened a new canvas, larger than any I'd ever used. I didn't have a plan, just a feeling. I painted for hours, colors colliding, textures building, emotions spilling. When it was done, I stepped back and saw something I hadn't intended, but somehow always meant to create. A family. Not literal. Not portraits. Just presence. Light and shadow. Chaos and order. Broken edges fitting into one another. I called it the photograph she imagined. And this time I printed copies. One for my father. One for my brother. One for me. And when I left, just like before, at her grave, no note. She didn't need one. Because this time, the photograph was real. I didn't expect the gallery to call. Not after all that time. Not after I'd quietly stepped back from the public art world to focus on my own healing, my family, and the quiet act of learning how to exist again. But the voice on the other end of the line was firm, excited, insisting they wanted to feature my newest piece. The photograph she imagined. In a traveling collection about memory, grief, and identity. At first, I hesitated. The piece wasn't just art. It was a diary, a confession, a stitched together reckoning of a life lived on the edge of silence. Showing it felt like peeling away the skin I'd grown to protect the sore underneath. But then I remembered the notebook from the attic, my mother's words scrawled in the margins. Even if it hurts, let them see you. Not the polished version, the truth. So I said yes. The open exhibit was scheduled in the city where I first went to college, a place I hadn't set foot in for over a decade. The memory of leaving that city, angry, misunderstood, full of the fire of youth, still lingered in my chest like stale smoke. Back then, I had stormed out of my family's orbit, determined to never look back. And now I was returning, not in defiance, but in surrender. Not defeat. No, but in the humble acceptance that healing sometimes means returning to the place where the wound first opened. My brother offered to come with me. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. Just that. No explanation needed anymore. That was the thing about us now. We finally understood the language of showing up. The trip down was quiet, just like our childhood car rides. He drove. I stared out the window. Somewhere between mile marker 113 and a gas station with bad coffee and great pies, he asked, "Do you think Mom knew we'd end up here?" Talking again. I didn't answer for a while. Then I said, "I think she hoped. I think she needed to believe we would." He nodded, eyes fixed on the road. I'm glad she was right. The gallery space was minimalist, whitewashed walls that made every brushstroke feel louder, more intimate. My piece hung in the center of a dedicated room, softly lit, surrounded by other works. Photographs of empty chairs, sculptures shaped like homes torn in half, poems printed on fabric. But mine stood differently. It was less about mourning and more about aftermath. What lingers, what rebuilds. As I walked closer to it, I saw the small plate beside the canvas. The photograph she imagined, mixed media on canvas. An exploration of fragmented memory, familial silence, and the echoes of the unlived. The artist's mother believed a specific photograph existed. It did not. This is what she saw in her mind. People came and went, murmured, stared too long, wiped at their eyes. I stood back and watched them, feeling like both a stranger and a ghost. My brother stood beside me. He didn't say anything, but I felt him breathing beside me, steady, solid, real. It occurred to me then how different we had become from who we thought we'd be, and how much closer we were because of it. Later that evening, we wandered the streets of the city. I showed him the bookstore where I used to sit on rainy days. He pointed out a Thai restaurant that he swore we'd eaten at once when I visited during his own college tour. We ended up on a bridge overlooking the river, lights shimmering in the water like scattered coins. That's when he told me something I didn't expect. "I used to feel like I was the only one trying to keep everything normal," he said. "And I resented you for not playing along." I nodded. "And I used to think you were part of the machine, just doing what was expected. It felt safer to be distant." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, we were both wrong." I shrugged. We were kids, and silence was easier than truth. The exhibit went on for several weeks, and I returned twice. Once with my father. He didn't walk the whole gallery, just stood in front of the painting. "She would have stood right here," he said. Pretended not to cry. Then made some joke about the colors being too dramatic. I laughed. He didn't. "She wasn't perfect," he continued. "But she loved hard. I think that's what made her so loud. She couldn't do anything halfway." I wanted to say I knew, but I think he needed to say it more than I needed to hear it. We left the gallery and went to lunch. It was the first meal we'd had together in public, just the two of us, since I was 17. We talked about the weather, about how his neighbor's tree was threatening to fall into his driveway, about nothing. But there was a comfort in that nothing. A truce that didn't require terms. Before I left, he handed me an envelope. "She wrote this," he said. "Never gave it to you. Found it behind the spice rack." I waited to open it. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted to be alone. Maybe because I was afraid it would say too much. Or worse, not enough. I finally read it on the train back. It was short. A few paragraphs. She wrote about the time she almost left. About a trip she took alone one weekend to clear her head. A weekend she told us was a conference. She said she sat in a hotel room and cried the entire time. "I didn't want to disappear," she wrote. "I just wanted to be seen." And I didn't know how to ask for that without feeling like I was breaking something sacred. Then this, "I see you." Even when I didn't say it, I see you. And I'm proud. I cried there on the train, surrounded by strangers and the soft hiss of tracks, the kind of crying that shakes but doesn't sob. I held that letter like it was a lifeline. Because, in many ways, it was. I didn't respond to it, of course. She was gone. But that night, I painted again, a small canvas. Just light and shadow. I called it Behind the Spice Rack. No one will ever see it. It wasn't for them. Back home, life returned to its quiet rhythms. My father called more often now. He sent me newspaper clippings he thought I'd find interesting. Little things like that. My brother and I began planning a trip with the whole family, a real one. Not a weekend, not a gesture. A week together. A cabin by a lake. No phones, no distractions. Just time. Time to see what we had left. Time to build what we hadn't dared to before. As the departure day neared, I began sorting through things again. Digital this time. Old photos, videos, messages. And that's when I found something I'd missed. An audio file, tucked into a backup folder from a laptop I hadn't opened in years. I clicked play. It was her voice. Clear, soft, tired. She was reading a poem, one of her own. I recognized the cadence, the repetition. The theme was longing, of course. It always was. But the final line stopped me. We are not the things we say. We are the echoes of what we dared not. That night, I copied the line and taped it to the back of a photograph. Not the imaginary one, a real one. Of us, at the beach, the one I developed months ago. I wrote it this time, "We'll remember." Then I placed it in a frame, wrapped it carefully, and packed it in my suitcase. Because this time, we weren't chasing a perfect image. We were going to make one. One with mud and burnt marshmallows, and maybe arguments about board games. One that wasn't posed, or polished, or imagined. One that was real. Because that's all any of us ever wanted, I realized. Not the illusion of a perfect family, but the proof that we were willing to try again. That we were willing to stay. That we could break and still come back. Even after all the silence. Even after all the years. Even after the photograph never taken. Because this was the one we'd remember. The cabin stood nestled in a thicket of pine and cedar, the lake stretching out behind it like a mirror waiting for a story to be told. It had been years. Decades. Really. Since we'd all stayed in one place under one roof for longer than a few hours. But here we were now, my father, quieter than ever but present in a way he'd never been before. My brother, somehow both changed in the same, his wife, kind and careful in how she stitched herself into our family's torn seams. Their children, wild and curious and delightfully unaware of how much history they were standing in the middle of. And me, hovering somewhere between memory and becoming, unsure if I was returning to something or building it from scratch. We arrived in the late afternoon, the sky bruised with dusk. The kids tore through the cabin like explorers, shrieking over bunk beds and creaky floors. My father claimed the smallest room without a word. My brother and I unloaded the car in silence, falling into an old rhythm neither of us acknowledged. It felt like muscle memory, cooperative, wordless, deeply familiar. That night, after dinner and dishes and too many s'mores by the fire pit, we all sat in the living room, tired but unwilling to break the spell by going to bed. My niece curled up in my lap and asked, "What was Grandma like when she was young?" No one moved. Even the fire seemed to pause. I looked at my father. He looked at the floor. Then, softly, he said, "She once climbed onto the roof of our college dorm to watch the stars. She told the campus police she was looking for Mars." The kids giggled. My brother smiled. "She used to whistle during storms," he added. Said it made the thunder less scary. I found myself laughing through the sudden burn in my throat. She made up lullabies that didn't rhyme, then got mad when we didn't remember them. For the first time in my life, I saw what it looked like when we all carried the same ghost. But instead of grief, the air held something else, a softness, a collective exhale. We told stories for hours, some real, some exaggerated, some half-remembered, but all tethered to her. Not the version we'd each mourned separately, but the woman we were now reconstructing together. I think that's what healing looks like, not erasing the past, not pretending the scars aren't there, but choosing to make space for each other's memories, even when they don't align. The next morning, I woke early, before the sun even considered rising. The house was still, blanketed in the silence only wilderness can offer. I stepped outside with a mug of coffee and watched the lake breathe. Mist rose from the surface like something sacred. The world felt untouched, as if waiting for permission to begin again. That's when I saw my father, already sitting on the dock, wrapped in a worn sweater, legs dangling over the edge like he was 10 again. I joined him without a word. We sat there, side by side, for what felt like an entire lifetime of quiet. Then he said, "I used to think silence was safety." He didn't look at me, just the lake. That if I didn't say the wrong thing, I couldn't hurt anyone. I didn't respond, just listened. But not speaking, sometimes that's worse. He rubbed his hands together. When she got sick, I kept thinking there'd be time to say everything, and then there wasn't. His voice cracked like thin ice. I thought you hated me for that. I shook my head. No, I just didn't understand you, and I didn't try. He nodded. Well, here we are. That was it. No apology, no emotional unraveling, just two people choosing, finally, to sit with the truth. Later that day, we went for a walk, all of us, through the woods, down a trail that led to a clearing overlooking the lake. The kids picked flowers and rocks. My brother held his wife's hand. My father walked a little behind us, slower but steady, and somewhere along that path someone, I think it was my niece, suggested we take a photo. One with everybody, she said. Even the dog. We laughed. But we did it. Someone set up a timer on a phone balanced on a backpack, and we all arranged ourselves in the tall grass. We didn't pose. We didn't fix our hair. My father squinted at the sun. My brother blinked. I was mid-laugh. But when I looked at the image later, back in the cabin that evening, something hit me like a wave. This was the photograph. Not the one she imagined. Not the one we searched for in drawers and albums and fogged memories. This was the one that mattered. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Honest, hard won. I printed it when I got home, framed it in wood the color of dusk. And this time, I didn't hide it in a drawer or save it for some special occasion. I hung it on my wall, front and center, where I could see it every day. A reminder that families don't break, they bend, they splinter. They lose each other and find each other again. And in between, they learn, they fail, they try. My brother now sends me music recommendations, random ones, songs that remind him of summer, or mom, or nothing in particular. My father calls every Thursday, sometimes just to tell me what he made for dinner. I visit them more often now. We don't talk about the past every time. We don't have to. It's in the way we move, the pauses we allow, the effort we make to stay. I think that's the real legacy of her silence. Not the pain, but the eventual courage to speak anyway. Sometimes I still write her letters. Less frequently now, but when I do, they're different. Less about sorrow, more about gratitude. I tell her about her grandchildren, about how my brother has become a better father than he ever thought he'd be. I tell her about Dad, how he's learning to laugh again. I tell her about the painting I'm working on. It's called What Came After. I haven't finished it yet. Maybe I never will, but every time I sit at my canvas, I see that photograph in the corner of my eye. The one we finally took. And I know, without question, she would have loved it. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was true. And that, more than anything, was what she wanted. For us to see each other. And to keep trying. Even after the silence, even after the storm, even after the photograph never taken. Because in the end, the truth is this: we took it anyway. Thanks for watching the video, subscribe, and like the video.